Welcome everyone to our event on SOAR and SecOps. I thought it'd be good to start off talking about what SOAR is and why companies and different kinds of organizations are beginning to use them. So SOAR stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. We'll dive into each of those in a little bit more detail over the next few minutes. Sort of setting the stage for it. Security incidents, as we hear about on the news almost every day, are increasing in complexity, and the costs associated with remediating them continues to go up. It's not a problem that gets better on its own. Studies show that the mean time to detect a security incident is still around 5 or 6 months, and then the mean time to resolve is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 months. And, it can be much longer depending on the type of incident and how prepared, what level of damage there was. Studies also show a range of costs associated with remediating between $4 and $9 million per incident. And again, that could be much higher just depending on what actually happened in your environment. So where did SOAR come from? Well, first there was SIEM, Security Incident and Event Management. They were designed to be, centralized repositories of security log information from around an enterprise. They came into being 15, 20 years ago, and they have become sort of a centerpiece in many security architectures. And rightfully so. I mean, it's good to collect data. It's absolutely necessary to collect data, but collecting data about what goes on in an enterprise is not, just the goal in itself. So it can contribute to creating actionable intelligence and, giving you a plan for the way forward. But, many times it doesn't really provide the ability to automate those responses that you would want to do. So then comes SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. Startups appeared, 7 to 10 years ago to try to address what they saw as some of the shortcomings of SIEM platforms. SIEM platforms sometimes would suffer from lots of false positives, and again, not really being able to automate and do a lot of the investigative tasks easily. We also saw the entrance of threat intelligence management vendors. Threat intelligence is, of course, cyber threat intelligence is things like IOCs, indicators of compromise. They might be MD file hashes or lists of bad IPs or URLs, things like that. They get shared around, and there are many open sources for that and many commercially available subscriptions. And threat intelligence management vendors consolidate that and bring that in typically now to SOAR systems. So it's available directly within your SOAR console. But we've also seen CTI management vendors who are evolving to becoming, full-blown SOAR platforms themselves. I think that's a really interesting development in the market in the last 5 or 6 years. And then lastly, SIEM platforms have been adding a lot of these features. They haven't remained, at a standstill. They've been growing and evolving and adapting SOAR capabilities themselves. And in some cases, many of the SIEM platforms have actually purchased a couple of the SOAR platforms and have integrated that into their overall solution. So let's talk about the top 5 use case categories. I mean, there are many use cases for SOAR, but let's just try to group them into the top 5. So threat hunting is something you've probably heard quite a bit about. It's something that's quite useful to do in an environment today. It's a proactive way of looking for potential bad activities inside your enterprise. You can take IOCs and customize them, and your SOC analysts, your threat hunters, can then go out and use that to look for signs of things that your other tools may have missed. And they can do that by engaging with different tools that you may have in your environment via API. There's the CTI management aspect I was mentioning a minute ago, pulling in those multiple feeds. A lot of these sources will have the same entries over and over again, so you have to deduplicate that. You also find that specific bits of IOCs are sort of short shelf life. IP addresses are malicious for a while, or so these things change quite rapidly. Same thing with being able to do real-time queries against multiple CTI sources. That's a useful thing. Investigations, that's probably the bread and butter of what you can do with a SOAR. It integrates with ITSM, IT Service Management Solutions. And by being able to create, assign, route tickets for analysts to work on, it can help smooth the workflow between shifts in your SOC. And again, allow for querying in both directions, both to your SIM for actual information about what's going on in your environment, plus against CTI sources. Automation and response. This has been an area for major improvement. I think many of the tasks that analysts have to do are quite repetitive, especially on the investigation side. So once you collect, let's say, what you think is a suspicious IP address, being able to automatically go out and get threat intelligence about that and then search across your entire environment for any instance of that in your various logs is a very useful and time-saving effort. So playbooks are important in this regard because this is the concept that sort of drives a lot of security automation today. And this can be anything from, a step-by-step guide for how to discover and remediate problems, as well as, single-click automation or full automation in some cases. Examples of some of the actions that one can do inside a playbook and with your SOAR system would be to automatically collect that evidence and then search across all your nodes in your enterprise, block an IP or URL at the firewall or at the web gateway. If you find a user's been compromised, you can suspend that user in your IAM system. And then you can even do things like cut off whole nodes from communication, delete all instances of an email, kill processes, and terminate network connections. Lastly, SOAR tools are very useful in SOCs and network operations centers for being a really good management console. I mean, we often talk about single pane of glass. It may not be possible to get to a single pane of glass, but certainly reducing the amount of consoles analysts and managers have to look at is very helpful. So SOAR tools provide dashboards, reports. Some allow for tracking of time on analyst tasks and recommendations for how to further automate. So where does SOAR sit in your environment? So SIM is kind of here in the center. It's pulling in information from, all your different infrastructure devices, your EPP, EDR solution, your next-gen firewall, web application firewall, and your various cloud instances. All that flows up into SIM. SOAR sort of sits on top of that, allowing it to query that, and then also query CTI sources as needed. But you see the orange lines show that this is sort of bidirectional. So not only is it pulling in information, but from SOAR you can command various actions from the console to all the different tools out there. And the SOAR console can either be run on-prem or in the cloud. Increasingly, we find vendors who are offering it in the cloud. So let's look at how SOAR might help with investigations that may be happening today. A couple of the major attacks that we've been hearing about for the last couple of months. So we have the SolarWinds incident that we were all aware of as of December, but had been perpetrated probably for at least 9 to 12 months before that. SolarWinds is a network monitoring software, incredibly popular, used by hundreds of thousands of organizations worldwide. This was an attack on the IT supply chain. There were up to perhaps 18,000 different victims. Potentially, hundreds were actually verified. This was used to further compromise victims' Active Directory, authentication, Office 365, to be able to read their email, and then even email security and endpoint security systems were compromised as a result too. There were massive cleanups that are still ongoing in many cases. Microsoft Exchange another instance of a fairly massive attack. This was against the on-premise email servers. As of the last report, there's still about 10,000 unpatched email servers out there that could be victims. This gave access to compromised Exchange servers' email, and has also led to the implantation of backdoors in other systems. So a state actor was initially involved, but what's really strange about this is cybercrime opportunists came along and exploited it soon thereafter. And in most cases, we have reported about, we see that if you have a sign of an initial compromise, it means secondary infections are also likely. So the cybercrime criminals have implanted backdoors as well. Lastly, we'll talk about ransomware here. So ransomware may not be new, but these attacks are ongoing and quite severe for those that experience them. Of course, they cause data loss, financial loss. Backups are a necessary part of the strategy, but they're just not enough. You have to have other security tools in place. And they're often used in conjunction with APT events. So we see APT actors detonating ransomware to throw off analysts after they've exfiltrated information. And likewise, this remediation efforts here can take weeks to recover from. So I thought we'd look at, how SolarWinds might, or how SOAR might be able to help in like a SolarWinds incident. So I've listed some of the TTPs and IOCs that you might see as a result of the SolarWinds attack. These are things that have been reported. And then SIM is, again, instrumental for all of it, as is CTI. SOAR sitting on top, drawing from those two sources, and then orchestrating and automating responses in things like your endpoint protection and detection, network detection and response, identity and access management, user behavioral analysis, unified endpoint management, configuration, and vulnerability management. So just to look at a couple here, we'll say to identify some of the affected software versions, we'll look at CTI, we'll look at config management. SolarWinds was known to have used command and control communications over VPN. So in addition to your data sources, you might need to command actions via NDR, network detection and response. It was also known that SolarWinds malicious executable persisted as a Windows task. So again, there you might want to use EPDR or your config and vulnerability management to look for that. The SolarWinds attackers added accounts to Active Directory, so that's the case where you would want to look in your IAM, your Active Directory system. It added tokens and certificates to services to be able to get access to things like email and Office 365. So looking forward and remediating using EPDR and IAM directly from the SOAR console is a possibility. Skipping ahead here, there's other things that were known about SolarWinds is that it had some unusual SAML attributes. You could pick that information up from CTI, look in your SIM, maybe coordinate with your identity and access management, your Active Directory Federation services, look for signs that some of these bizarre SAML attributes or attribute values were in place. And then lastly, data exfiltration, to look to see if anything actually left your organization. Of course, SIM would be instrumental. CTI would be helpful to know what to look for. And then you'd want to look across both endpoints and networks. So directing those investigations from SOAR to your EPDR and NDR would be a very big time saver. In the case of the Exchange server hack, we could see that SOAR could be used to, first of all, identify all the Exchange servers in your environment, connect to vulnerability management, see which versions are using versions that are vulnerable, grab and update the servers with the latest patches and automate that patching as much as possible. Look for IOCs for evidence of other kinds of secondary infections, and then you can use SOAR to disseminate that to those downstream systems like EPDR and NDR. And then again, given that the Exchange server was hacked by cyber criminals have implanted other kinds of backdoors and ransomware. You'd want to use the SOAR platform to do, proactive threat hunting and stay abreast of all the IOCs that are being developed. Look across your SIM for instances of that, and then actually dive down into your EPDR, NDR, and XDR email servers and look for signs of that, and then attempt to remediate it. In the case of ransomware, just one quick example, hypothetical, let's say your EPDR detects a ransomware encryption attempt from an email. EPDR can terminate that, but then it also notifies SIM, which gets picked up by SOAR. SOAR can create a ticket, integrate that with your ITSM system, query SIM for other similar instances, and then query CTI to get new indicators, and then update EPDR, add all this to the ticket, and do this automatically, sometimes within seconds, sometimes within minutes, steps that would take an analyst, hours to do. This really gives analysts a jump on the investigation this way. And then as part of the remediation, SOAR can direct the email gateway to remove all similar emails and perform, things to dispose of the ticket at the end of the event. So finally, let's take a look at the strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats. I think SOAR really excels at a variety of things here, automating those repetitive tasks. Again, it can save lots of time just by helping analysts to get the information up front. It can consolidate the workflows, reduce the number of screens and consoles that analysts and managers have to interact with. It can enable collaboration, again, between teams, across shifts, on complex tickets, deduplicate that CTI, and really focus on orchestration and automation of responses, with the primary goal being, decrease the mean time to detect and respond. There are some challenges. It's complex to implement, complex to run. SOAR really depends on those integrations with those EPP, EDR, NDR, IDS, all those kinds of tools. Without it, it is less effective. There are opportunities here specifically for managed security service providers, for companies that may not have the staff or expertise to run SOAR. It can be outsourced. Vendors can offer these kinds of services as well. And then for cases where there aren't integrations for popular tools, third-party developers can get in and create those as needed. On the threat side, as part of the leadership compass, I found that a lot of the SOAR tools are missing some integrations for some of the leading European developed security tools. I think that's going to be addressed probably in the next year or so. And then SOAR is great, but it doesn't fix everything, and the most advanced adversaries actually understand not just the common security tools that you use, but they're also beginning to understand how automation is involved. So in closing, I would say SOAR is a very useful thing. It's not just for large enterprises or governments anymore. It's something that should be coming to all enterprises because it has a lot of advantages for on the automation and time saving side. So I know I'm down at the bottom of the hour and happy to take questions, and now we're in the Wonder Me room, and I'll see you on the panel later.